The metal door slammed shut behind David Reeves, and he stumbled forward onto wet grass. His hands were still bound with energy cuffs that burned against his wrists. The transport ship lifted off immediately, its engines drowning out his shouts. Within seconds, it disappeared into the purple sky, leaving nothing but silence and the smell of alien flowers. David looked around slowly. Trees surrounded him on all sides, their bark a strange blue color that seemed to pulse in the dim light. The sky above was wrong, tinted violet by a sun he couldn't see through the thick canopy. Everything felt wet here, heavy with moisture that made breathing difficult. His prison clothes were already soaked through with sweat. 3 days ago, he had been Lieutenant David Reeves, a scout on humanity's first deep space exploration mission. Then came the accident. The navigation computer failed during a routine jump, and 3 crew members died when their section decompressed. The alien tribunal didn't care about computer malfunctions. They didn't understand human testimony. They needed someone to blame, and David was convenient. The sentence was simple: Refuge 9, the prison planet where nothing survived. The guards had laughed when they threw him in the transport. One of them, a creature with too many arms and eyes that glowed red, told him the record was 4 days. Most prisoners died within hours. The planet wasn't designed to kill quickly. It just wore you down until something else finished the job. David's wrists suddenly felt lighter. The energy cuffs deactivated and fell to the ground, their charge depleted. That was the only mercy the Coalition showed. He rubbed his wrists and looked at what they'd left him. Prison clothes that wouldn't last a week. A damaged translator chip in his neck that barely worked. A small pack with 7 days of nutrient paste. That was all. He heard something move in the bushes to his left. David froze, every muscle tight. The movement came again, closer this time. Then he saw them. 6 creatures emerged from the undergrowth, each the size of a large dog but built like reptiles. They walked on 6 legs, their scaled bodies lean and hungry. Yellow eyes fixed on David with an intelligence that made his stomach drop. These weren't mindless animals. They were hunters, and they knew exactly what he was. David did the only thing he could think of. He ran. The creatures followed immediately, their claws clicking on the wet ground. He crashed through bushes and jumped over roots, his lungs burning. Behind him, he heard them spreading out, flanking him like a trained pack. They'd done this before, many times. A clearing appeared ahead, and David's heart sank. He was heading straight for a cliff edge. No, not a cliff, a river. Brown water rushed past below, moving fast over rocks. He didn't slow down. The creatures were right behind him now, close enough that he could hear their breathing. David jumped. The water hit him like a wall, cold and powerful. It dragged him under immediately, spinning him around until he didn't know which way was up. His lungs screamed for air. Then something grabbed his leg. Pain shot through him as teeth sank into his calf. David kicked hard and felt the creature let go. He broke the surface, gasping, and saw the riverbank rushing past. The 6-legged hunters stood at the water's edge, watching him go. They didn't follow into the water. The current carried David downstream for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When he finally managed to grab a low-hanging branch and pull himself onto the bank, his leg was bleeding badly. 2 deep puncture wounds leaked red down his calf. He tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped it tight, but blood still seeped through. The sun was setting. David could tell because the purple light was fading to a deep indigo that made everything harder to see. He needed shelter. He needed it now. Night on an alien planet full of predators was not where he wanted to be. He limped through the trees looking for anything useful. His training kicked in despite the pain and fear. Look for high ground. Look for cover. Look for defensible positions there. A massive tree with a hollow at its base hidden behind hanging vines. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. David crawled inside and pulled vegetation across the entrance. His leg throbbed with each heartbeat. The blood on his shirt was already attracting insects, small flying things that bit and buzzed. He took the bloodied fabric and crawled back out, moving 20 meters away from his hiding spot. He left the bloody shirt on a game trail leading in the wrong direction, then covered his own tracks back to the hollow tree as best he could. Inside the hollow, David finally let himself feel the fear. His hands shook. His breath came in short gasps. The tribunal had sentenced him to death, just a slower version than execution. This planet was designed to break people. The Coalition used it to dispose of problems, and he was just another problem now. Something screamed in the distance. A long, horrible sound that ended in a wet gurgle. David pressed himself against the back of the hollow, making himself as small as possible. Other sounds followed, roars, crashes, the sounds of things hunting and things dying. The night was alive with violence and he was trapped in the middle of it. He thought about his crew, probably thinking he was already dead. He thought about Earth, impossibly far away. He thought about the next 4 days, if he even lasted that long. Then he forced those thoughts away. Panic wouldn't help. Fear wouldn't help. He needed to think like a scout again, like a survivor. Tomorrow, he would learn the rules of this place. He would watch and adapt. He would find food and water and better shelter. He would prove that humans didn't break as easily as the Coalition thought. But tonight he would just survive until morning. David closed his eyes and listened to the jungle kill itself around him, counting his heartbeats until dawn. Day 2 began with rain that felt wrong against David's skin, slightly acidic and warm. He woke with his legs swollen and hot to the touch. The wounds from yesterday's river creature had turned an angry red. Infection was setting in, and he had nothing to treat it with except mud and hope. David crawled out of the hollow tree and looked at the jungle with different eyes today. Yesterday he'd been prey, running and hiding. Today he needed to become something else. He needed to understand this place before it killed him. The 6-legged hunters, he'd started calling them ravagers in his mind, hunted by heat and movement. He'd figured that out watching them track him yesterday. Their eyes were small and clouded, probably poor vision, but they'd followed him perfectly until he hit the water. The mud was cold against his injured leg, but David packed it on thick anyway. His grandmother used to say mud drew out infection. He had no idea if that worked on alien bacteria, but doing something felt better than doing nothing. While the mud dried, he studied the area around his shelter. Animal tracks crossed everywhere in the soft ground. Most he didn't recognize, but patterns emerged. Certain tracks avoided certain areas. Territorial boundaries, maybe. He spent the morning just watching. A small creature that looked like a cross between a rabbit and a bird hopped past, nibbling on purple flowers. It moved in quick bursts, freezing between movements to listen. Smart. David noticed it avoided the blue-barked trees entirely, sticking to areas with silver-leafed bushes. That meant something. Either the blue trees were dangerous or predators used them for cover. By midday, David's stomach was cramping hard. The nutrient paste helped, but he'd already eaten 2 days' worth. At this rate, he'd be out in 3 days instead of 7. He needed real food. The rabbit-bird creature was still in sight, working its way through a patch of mushrooms growing on a fallen log. David watched it carefully. If it could eat the mushrooms, maybe he could too. He waited until the creature moved on, then approached the log. The mushrooms were small and gray, nothing impressive. David broke off a tiny piece, smaller than his pinky nail, and touched it to his lips. No burning. No numbness. He waited 10 minutes, then put it on his tongue. Bitter but not painful. He spat it out and waited another hour. No reaction. That was good enough for now. He'd try a real bite tomorrow if he was still alive. The rain stopped in the afternoon and the jungle came alive with noise. David realized he'd been hearing the sounds wrong. What he thought was random chaos was actually rhythm. Certain calls happened at certain times. The high-pitched whistles came before the deep roars. The rustling in the canopy followed a pattern, moving from east to west as the day progressed. Everything here followed rules. He just needed to learn them. On day 3, David found water. A stream ran through a rocky area about a quarter mile from his tree. He'd been drinking from puddles, which probably explained the stomach cramps that had started that morning. The stream was clear and cold, running over smooth stones that clicked together underwater. He drank deep, then followed the stream uphill to find its source. Knowledge was survival. The stream led to a cave. Not huge, but bigger than his tree hollow and with actual stone walls. David approached carefully, watching for signs of occupation. Fresh scat near the entrance made him pause, but it was old and dried. Whatever lived here hadn't been back in days. Inside, the cave stayed dry despite the rain. A small opening at the back let smoke escape. This could work. Day 4 brought the mushrooms back into his life. His nutrient paste was running low, and the tiny test piece from 2 days ago hadn't killed him. David picked a handful and roasted them over a small fire he'd made using friction and dried moss. They tasted like dirt and bitterness, but they filled his stomach. He kept half down before throwing up the rest. Progress. He also tested the mud camouflage properly. David covered himself head to toe in mud mixed with crushed leaves and grass. The smell was horrible, but when a pair of ravagers passed within 10 feet of him, they didn't react. They were hunting by heat signature, just like he'd thought. The mud layer disrupted it enough to make him invisible to them. That changed everything. Day 5 was moving day. David packed his few possessions and relocated to the cave. He spent hours covering his trail, using tricks his survival instructor had taught him years ago. Walk in streams, step on rocks, break branches in the wrong direction. The jungle might kill him, but he'd make it work for every inch. The cave became home. He built a proper fire pit with stones arranged to reflect heat. He wove a door from branches and vines that wouldn't stop a predator but would slow it down. He started a collection of rocks that might make good tools. Sharp ones, heavy ones, ones that fit his hand right. On day 6, David killed his first ravager. It came sniffing around the cave entrance at dawn, probably following the smell of roasted mushrooms. David had prepared for this. A deadfall trap, simple but effective. Heavy rocks balanced on sticks that released when the tripwire pulled. The ravager died instantly, crushed under stones that David had spent 2 days positioning. He stared at the body for a long time. Blood pooled under the rocks, a different color than human blood, more blue than red. This creature had tried to kill him on his first day here. Now it was dead and he was alive. The difference was planning. The difference was thinking ahead. David butchered the ravager with a sharp stone, working carefully. The hide was tough and scaly, useful. The bones were light but strong, perfect for tools. The meat was questionable, but he cooked a small piece anyway. It tasted awful, sour and gamey, but it was protein. He managed 3 bites before his stomach rebelled. Day 7 arrived with clear skies and the end of his nutrient paste. David sat outside his cave and ate the last squeeze of processed food that tasted like cardboard and chemicals. From now on, everything he ate would come from this planet. Everything he wore, everything he used, all of it would be scavenged or made. The Coalition had thrown him away, but he was still here. He'd learned so much in a week. The ravagers hunted at dawn and dusk. The rabbit birds were edible and slow if you approached from downwind. Water flowed downhill, obviously, but certain plants only grew near clean sources. Fire scared most predators but attracted some. The jungle had a rhythm, and he was starting to hear it. David looked at his reflection in the stream that afternoon. Mud-covered, scratched, thinner than a week ago, but still standing. Still thinking, still alive. The Coalition guard said 4 days was the record. He'd beaten that. Now he needed to see how much further he could go. He spent the evening sharpening rocks into better tools, planning tomorrow's hunt, and marking his territory with fire-scorched stones. This was his cave now. His stream. His section of jungle. He was part of the ecosystem whether it liked it or not, and he planned to make sure everything here learned that lesson fast. Somewhere in the distance, something roared. Something big. David added it to his mental map of threats and went back to work on his tools. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight he had survived another day. That was enough. David's spear punched through the rabbit bird's neck on day 10, and the creature dropped without a sound. Clean kill, quick. He'd been practicing for 3 days, missing more than hitting, but his accuracy was improving. Food was no longer his biggest problem. Water was stable. Shelter was secure. He'd even started smoking meat over his fire, creating a small stockpile for emergencies. The jungle was starting to make sense. David had mapped almost a square mile around his cave, marking safe paths with stacked stones and dangerous areas with crossed sticks. He knew where the ravagers denned, where the water dwellers fed, where the aggressive plants grew thick. Knowledge turned chaos into patterns, and patterns meant survival. Then the smoke changed everything. David had been burning green wood to create smoke signals, marking his territory the way he'd seen other predators mark theirs. Scent markers, claw marks, killed prey left on display. If he was going to live here, everything needed to know this area was claimed. The smoke worked well, thick white clouds that rose above the canopy. Too well. The trees shook first. David felt the vibration through his feet before he heard the sound. Deep thuds, rhythmic and heavy like thunder walking. He grabbed his best spear and moved to higher ground, climbing onto a boulder that gave him a view of the approach. What emerged from the tree line made his breath stop. It stood 12 feet tall at the shoulder, built like a moving mountain. 4 massive legs, each thick as tree trunks, supported a body covered in armored plates that overlapped like scales. 2 arms extended from its upper body, ending in claws that could easily split a man in half. The head was broad and flat, with eyes that glowed yellow in the filtered sunlight. A Titan, the apex predator that had destroyed every coalition settlement attempt. David didn't move, didn't breathe. The Titan sniffed the air, its massive head swinging toward the cave. Toward his smoke. It took a step closer and David saw the limp. The creature's left rear leg dragged slightly, the foot not quite touching the ground properly. As it turned, he spotted the wound. A massive tear in the hide just above the back leg, infected and oozing. The flesh around it was swollen, discolored. The creature was sick. The Titan roared, a sound that shook leaves from trees and sent every animal in the area fleeing. David pressed himself flat against the boulder, making himself as small as possible. The creature moved through his territory like a storm, crushing his carefully placed traps, scattering his fire pit, investigating everything with violent curiosity. Then as suddenly as it arrived, it left, limping back into the jungle heading north. David stayed frozen for another hour before climbing down. His camp was destroyed, 3 days of work ruined in minutes. But he was alive, and more importantly, he was thinking. The Titan was sick. That infection would kill it eventually, maybe in days or weeks. A sick predator was unpredictable, dangerous to everything around it, but it was also vulnerable in a way a healthy Titan wouldn't be. He made a decision that was either brilliant or insane. Over the next 2 days, David tracked the Titan, not closely, just following its trail from a safe distance. The creature wasn't hard to track. It left destruction wherever it went, broken trees and torn earth. He found where it drank, where it slept, where it tried unsuccessfully to reach the wound on its leg. The den was a collapsed hillside, creating a sheltered hollow large enough for the massive creature. David watched from cover as the Titan returned each evening, settling down with obvious pain. It would twist, trying to reach the infection, growling in frustration when it couldn't. The wound was just out of reach of its claws, positioned where the creature's own body prevented access. On day 13, David started gathering plants. Certain mushrooms he'd been eating had properties he'd noticed. They stopped smaller cuts from getting infected. A moss that grew near the stream reduced swelling when he'd tested it on his own healing leg wound. He had no idea if these would work on Titan biology, but they worked on him. It was worth trying. He made a poultice, crushing the ingredients between rocks and mixing them with clean water. The paste smelled sharp and medicinal. David tested it on his own arm, watching for reactions. Slight burning, then cooling. No rash. No worse than the injury it was treating. Good enough. Day 14 was the crazy day. The day David Reeves, convicted criminal and abandoned prisoner, walked up to a sleeping Titan with medicine. He waited until the creature was deep in sleep, its massive sides rising and falling with slow breaths. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to run. This was the stupidest thing he'd ever done, and he'd accidentally crashed a spaceship. David approached from the blind side, moving with glacial slowness. Each step took a full minute. He kept downwind, kept his breathing shallow, kept his eyes on that massive head. 20 feet away, 10 feet, 5. He could hear the creature's breathing now, see the scars across its armored hide. This thing had survived battles that would kill anything else on the planet. The wound was worse up close. David could see bone through the infected tissue. He scooped paste onto his hand and reached forward, his entire arm shaking. The poultice touched infected flesh. The Titan's breathing hitched. David froze, certain he was about to die, but the creature didn't wake. He spread the medicine across the wound, working quickly now, then backed away step by careful step. He ran the last 100 yards, crashing through bushes and not caring about noise. When he finally stopped, his heart was hammering so hard he thought it might break his ribs. But he'd done it. The medicine was applied. Now he just had to wait and see if it worked or if he'd just made a Titan very angry. Day 15 brought the first sign. David returned to his observation point and saw the Titan moving differently. Not healed, but not worse. The creature actually seemed calmer, less agitated. It settled into its den without the usual growling and thrashing. David left more poultice near the entrance, placed on a flat rock where the creature would find it. Day 16, the medicine was gone. The Titan had found it and, based on the smears on the ground, tried to apply it itself. David felt something weird in his chest. Not quite hope, but something close. He made more poultice, a larger batch this time, and left it in the same spot. This became the routine. David would prepare medicine, leave it at the den, and watch from hiding. The Titan's wound slowly improved. The swelling went down. The discoloration faded. The creature started putting weight on the injured leg again. And somewhere in that process, something changed. On day 19, David arrived at his usual observation spot to find the Titan already awake and watching him. Those yellow eyes fixed on his hiding place with unmistakable awareness. David's blood turned to ice. The creature knew he was there, had probably known for days. It stood slowly, its full height even more impressive when directed at you personally. Then the Titan did something David never expected. It sat down, deliberately, carefully, like a dog responding to a command it had never been taught. The massive creature just sat there watching him, not attacking, not fleeing, just waiting. David stood up slowly, hands visible, no weapons. The Titan's eyes tracked him, but the creature didn't move. He took a step forward, nothing. Another step. The Titan's tail swished once, then stilled. David walked to within 10 feet and set down the fresh poultice. The Titan leaned forward, sniffed it, then looked back at him. In that moment, David understood something the Coalition never had. These creatures weren't mindless killers. They were animals in an ecosystem, survivors just like him. This Titan, this female he'd started calling Ash in his mind because of her gray coloring, was just trying to live in a hostile world, and she'd just figured out that the small human was trying to help. He backed away slowly. Ash watched him go but didn't follow. David returned to his cave and sat staring at nothing for an hour, processing what had just happened. He'd made contact with the most dangerous predator on the planet, and they'd reached an understanding. It was impossible. The Coalition would never believe it. He barely believed it himself, but it had happened and it changed everything. Day 20 began with David doing something that would have seemed insane 3 weeks ago. He walked directly to Ash's den carrying fresh meat from his morning hunt. The Titan was already awake, lying in the entrance to her hollow with her head resting on her front arms. Those yellow eyes tracked his approach, but she made no move to attack. David stopped at what he'd started thinking of as the meeting rock, a flat boulder about 15 feet from the den. He set down the rabbit bird carcass and stepped back. Ash watched him for a long moment, then slowly stood. Her injured leg still showed signs of the wound, but the infection was gone. She moved with less pain now, more fluid. She approached the rock, sniffed the offering, and ate it in 2 bites. Then she looked at him and made a sound, not a roar, something softer, almost questioning. David realized she was communicating, trying to understand this strange small creature that brought medicine and food. He slowly sat down on the ground, making himself less threatening. Ash tilted her head, a gesture so familiar it was almost funny. Dogs did that. Cats did that. Apparently, Titans did it too. Over the next 3 days, David established a routine. Morning visit with food, afternoon check on the wound, evening observation from a distance. Ash tolerated all of it, and more than that, she seemed to anticipate it. On day 22, he arrived to find her already at the meeting rock, waiting. That was new. That was trust. The real breakthrough came on day 23. David was sitting at the meeting rock watching Ash eat when he noticed something. A pack of ravagers was circling his cave area, 6 of them moving in coordinated patterns. They'd been testing his territory for days, getting bolder. Usually he'd chase them off with fire and thrown rocks, but he was here, and they were there. Ash noticed his attention shift. She followed his gaze, spotted the ravagers, and made that questioning sound again. David stood and pointed toward his cave, then made a pushing motion with his hands. Go away, get lost. It was a stupid gesture to make to a Titan, but Ash surprised him again. She understood the direction, if not the meaning. She looked where he pointed, then back at him. David tried something crazy. He pointed at the ravagers again, then at Ash, then made a charging motion. Her eyes seemed to brighten with what might have been understanding or might have been hunger. Either way, she moved. Ash rose to her full height and headed toward David's territory with him following at a safe distance. The ravagers saw the Titan coming and scattered immediately, but Ash was faster than her size suggested. She caught 2 of them, killed them with casual efficiency, and chased the others well beyond David's marked boundaries. When she returned, she dropped the dead ravagers at David's feet and sat down, looking pleased with herself. David laughed. He couldn't help it. The sound echoed through the jungle, probably the first human laughter this planet had ever heard. He just directed a Titan like a very large, very dangerous dog. Ash made that soft questioning sound again, and David reached out slowly. His hand touched her armored hide, feeling warmth and texture like nothing on earth. Ash didn't move, just watched him with those intelligent yellow eyes. Day 24 brought another change. David's territory had become noticeably safer. Smaller predators avoided it entirely now. The rabbit birds moved in, grazing on the plants near his cave. Other small creatures followed. They'd figured out that David's area, now patrolled occasionally by Ash, was the safest place in the jungle. He was accidentally creating an ecosystem refuge. David started testing communication properly. He'd point at things and make sounds, trying to establish commands. Sit was easy. Ash already did it. Stay took longer, but by day 25, she'd hold position while he moved away. Come was the hardest because it required her to trust that approaching him meant something good. He used food rewards, small pieces of meat for each successful response. The Coalition monitoring drone appeared on day 26, right on schedule. David spotted it an hour before it reached his area, a small metal object moving through the sky in a search pattern. He made a decision fast. He grabbed Ash's attention and led her back to her den, encouraging her to stay hidden. Then he covered his own improvements to the cave, making everything look as abandoned and wild as possible. The drone passed overhead, cameras sweeping. David hid in the undergrowth covered in mud, looking like just another piece of jungle. The drone's scan lasted maybe 30 seconds, then it moved on. He waited until it was completely out of sight before emerging. That was close. If the Coalition knew he was alive, they'd investigate. If they knew about Ash, they'd probably orbital bombard the whole area. David returned to normal routine on day 27, but with new urgency. The drone would be back in 30 days. He had a month to decide what he wanted. Rescue meant returning to a coalition that had thrown him away. Staying meant building something here, something the galaxy said was impossible. He looked at Ash, who was waiting at the meeting rock as usual, and knew which option made more sense. The homestead started taking real shape. David built a better shelter, using techniques he'd learned and materials Ash helped him gather. Turns out a Titan could knock down trees much faster than a human with a stone axe. He created a garden area, transplanting edible plants he'd identified. The rabbit birds were fully domesticated now, or as domesticated as wild animals got. They'd come when he called, and he protected them from predators. On day 28, David successfully hunted a larger predator with Ash's help. He'd spotted a lone hunter, something like a big cat with too many legs stalking near the stream. David got its attention, led it toward Ash, and together they brought it down. The meat was good, better than rabbit bird. The hide would make proper clothes. The bones would make better tools. This was teamwork, human and Titan working together. Day 29 brought visitors, but not the kind David expected. 5 creatures emerged from the jungle, walking upright but barely. They were prisoners, other species dumped on Refuge 9 and somehow still alive. They were starving, wounded, desperate. They saw David's cave, his fire, his food stores, and their eyes filled with hunger that had nothing to do with empty stomachs. David stood in front of his cave with his best spear, facing them down. They were bigger than him, stronger individually, but they were broken, barely holding together. Their leader, a tall alien with blue skin and too many teeth, demanded food in broken coalition common language, demanded shelter, demanded David's territory because they were dying and he clearly had it too good. David refused. This was his home. He'd earned it. They could learn to survive like he had, or they could leave. The leader laughed and reached for a weapon, some piece of metal shaped into a club. The other 4 spread out surrounding David. This was going to be a fight. Then Ash walked out of the tree line behind David, 12 feet of armored muscle and predator instinct, her yellow eyes fixed on the intruders. She made no sound, just stood there being impossibly large and dangerous. The 5 prisoners froze. Their leader's weapon fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. They'd heard about Titans. Everyone dumped on Refuge 9 heard about Titans right before they died. But this Titan stood with the human, stood behind him like a bodyguard, like a partner. The leader looked at David with new eyes, seeing not a fellow prisoner but something else entirely. Someone who'd tamed the untamable, someone who'd made the impossible possible. They ran. All 5 of them scattered into the jungle, and David let them go. He turned to Ash and reached up to touch her shoulder. She lowered her head, bringing those massive jaws close enough to bite him in half, but instead just made that soft, questioning sound. David smiled. They had an understanding now, him and this Titan. They were a pack, the strangest pack this planet had ever seen, and together they owned this territory absolutely. Day 30 was coming tomorrow, the day he'd promised himself he'd last. He'd beaten the record by over 3 weeks. But more than that, he'd done something the Coalition said was impossible. He'd thrived here. Now he just had to figure out what came next. The transport ship descended through purple clouds on the morning of Day 30, and David watched it from his observation point with a sinking feeling in his stomach. This wasn't the monitoring drone. This was a full prisoner transport, the same kind that had dumped him here a month ago. It landed hard in a clearing 2 miles east, and David counted the prisoners as they stumbled out. 27 bodies, various species, all looking terrified and angry. The ship left within minutes, just like before. David tracked its ascent until it disappeared, then looked down at the chaos beginning below. These weren't political prisoners like him. He could tell by the way they moved, the way they immediately started fighting over the dropped supply packs. These were violent criminals, the worst the Coalition had to offer. By midday, the jungle had already claimed 3 of them. David heard the screams, heard the Ravager packs moving in. The new prisoners were loud, panicked, doing everything wrong. They crashed through territory boundaries, scattered into regions no sane creature entered, and generally announced themselves as easy prey. The ecosystem responded with immediate violence. By evening, the survivors had formed into groups. David observed 4 distinct clusters, the largest containing 15 prisoners led by a massive creature that looked like it was made of muscle and bad decisions. That group was heading west toward his territory. They'd spotted his smoke signals earlier and clearly decided to investigate. David prepared. He reinforced his traps, the spike pits he'd dug and covered on the game trails. He set up deadfalls in the likely approach routes. He checked his weapons, 5 good spears and a collection of throwing rocks. Then he found Ash and tried to explain what was coming. She seemed to understand his agitation, if not the specifics. Day 31 brought the first real test. A scouting party of 5 prisoners found David's outer markers and kept coming. They saw his cultivated plants, his protected rabbit bird areas, and realized someone was living here. Successfully living here. They wanted to know how, and they weren't planning to ask nicely. The first 2 died in spike pits, their weight triggering the carefully balanced covers. Their screams brought the others running, which triggered the deadfall trap. Heavy rocks crashed down, and suddenly 3 of the 5 were gone. The remaining 2 fled, bleeding and terrified, back toward their main group. David knew what came next. They'd be angry now, scared and desperate. That combination made people stupid and dangerous. He was right. That night the main group attacked. 15 prisoners moving through the darkness with weapons and rage, intent on taking everything David had built. They never made it past the tree line. Ash hit them from the side, a wall of armored fury that scattered the group instantly. David had positioned himself on high ground with throwing rocks and spears, picking off stragglers while Ash handled the main force. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. The leader, that massive muscled creature, tried to stand and fight. Ash broke it in half with one swipe of her claws. The others ran in every direction, screaming into the jungle. David let them go. He wasn't a killer by choice, but he'd defend what was his. The jungle would finish most of them anyway. Day 32 brought unexpected visitors. 3 prisoners approached his territory under a white flag, a torn piece of fabric tied to a stick. They were wounded, starving, and completely broken. David recognized the look. It was the same one he'd had on day 1. These 3 had figured out they couldn't survive alone out here. They begged. Actually got on their knees and begged for sanctuary. David studied them carefully. 2 looked genuinely terrified and submissive. The third kept glancing around, calculating. That one was trouble. David accepted the first 2 and sent the third away. No second chances for obvious threats. The 2 survivors were named Reed and Hannah, both convicted of minor crimes and clearly not built for violence. David put them to work immediately. If they wanted his protection, they'd earn their keep. Reed was good with his hands, helped improve the shelter. Hannah understood plants, helped expand the garden. Within a day, they'd proven themselves useful. Day 33 brought more chaos from outside. The scattered prisoner groups were destabilizing the entire jungle ecosystem. Ravager packs were forming supergroups, driven from their territories by desperate prisoners. Larger predators were moving into new areas, creating conflicts. The whole region was becoming more dangerous as the ecosystem tried to rebalance. David found a young titan, maybe half Ash's size, dead in a clearing. Something had killed it, torn it apart. That shouldn't have been possible. Titans were apex predators, but the tracks around the body told a story. Multiple large predators working together, driven by hunger and displaced territories. The prisoners had broken the jungle's balance. On day 34, 2 more survivors found David's settlement. They'd heard rumors from the fleeing prisoners. Stories about a human who lived in comfort, protected by a titan ruling a piece of the jungle like a king. They wanted in. David accepted them under the same terms. Work or leave. They chose work. The settlement was growing. 5 people now plus Ash on patrol. David established rules. Everyone worked. Everyone shared. No stealing. No violence within the territory. Break the rules and you were exiled. Simple and clear. The ex-prisoners, used to chaos and violence, seemed relieved to have structure again. Day 35 brought the real problem. The prisoner who David had turned away, the calculating one, had formed his own group. 6 criminals who'd survived through violence and cunning. They'd watched David's settlement and decided it was time to take it. Not through direct assault like the first group, but through planning. They struck at dawn. 3 attackers came from the east, loud and obvious. David and Ash responded to that threat, which was exactly what they wanted. The other 3 came from the west, hitting the undefended settlement. Reed went down with a club to the head. Hannah screamed. The rabbit birds scattered in panic. David heard the screams and realized the trick immediately. He sprinted back, leaving Ash to handle the eastern group. He arrived to find one attacker holding Hannah hostage, a knife to her throat. The calculating prisoner stood in the center of David's camp, smiling. He wanted to negotiate, wanted equal control of the settlement, wanted respect and power. David put a spear through his chest. No negotiation, no respect. Just immediate violence delivered with the precision of a month's worth of practice. The hostage-taker panicked and ran, releasing Hannah. David's second spear caught him in the back before he made 10 steps. The third attacker surrendered immediately, throwing down weapons and begging for mercy. Ash returned, having crushed the eastern distraction. She looked at the bodies, at David standing over them with blood on his hands, and made that soft questioning sound. David realized he'd just killed 2 people without hesitation. A month ago, that would have destroyed him. Now it was just survival math. Protect the territory. Protect the pack. The survivor from the attacking group became an example. David exiled him, sending him into the jungle with nothing. Word would spread about what happened to those who attacked the humans' territory. The jungle became the execution. Day 36 brought a settlement meeting. David gathered everyone and explained the situation clearly. More prisoners would probably come. Some would want sanctuary. Others would want to take what they'd built. They needed to be ready to defend themselves and smart about who they accepted. Reed, recovered from his head wound, suggested building a wall. Hannah wanted to expand the garden to feed more people. The others contributed ideas. For the first time, it felt like an actual community rather than just David and some helpers. By day 37, the settlement had changed. A wooden palisade surrounded the core area. Guards rotated on watch duty. The garden had doubled in size. They'd domesticated more rabbit birds and even captured some of the smaller predators to raise for food. What started as one human's survival had become a functioning settlement. David stood on the wall that evening, watching the sunset turn the sky purple and orange. Ash rested below, her massive form a comfortable presence. Reed and Hannah were cooking dinner. 2 other ex-prisoners were reinforcing the palisade. In 37 days, he'd gone from a dead man walking to the leader of the first successful human settlement on Refuge 9. But he knew the real test was coming. The coalition monitoring ship would return in 23 days. They'd find not a corpse, but a thriving community. David needed to decide what to tell them, what to demand, and whether he even wanted to be rescued anymore. This place had tried to kill him, but he'd turned it into home. That changed everything. Day 60 arrived with clear skies and the sound of coalition engines. David stood on his settlement wall watching the monitoring ship descend. It was right on schedule. Exactly 30 days after the last check. The ship would expect to find bodies and wreckage. Instead, it would find something impossible. The settlement had grown. 8 survivors now lived within the wooden walls, working together on projects that would have seemed insane a month ago. They'd built proper structures using techniques David remembered and materials the jungle provided. The garden sprawled across cleared land, growing 3 types of edible plants. Domesticated animals grazed in protected pens. Smoke rose from cooking fires in a primitive forge where Reed was learning to work metal, salvaged from crashed monitoring drones. Ash sat outside the main gate like a living statue, her yellow eyes tracking the descending ship. The other settlers gathered behind David, nervous but trusting his lead. They'd all been condemned to death by the Coalition. Now they were about to demand recognition as something else entirely. The ship landed in the same clearing where David had been dumped 2 months ago. A ramp extended, and 3 Coalition officers emerged wearing environment suits and carrying weapons. They looked around in visible confusion. This wasn't right. The jungle should be pristine, untouched except for scattered bones. David walked out to meet them, Ash following at a distance. The officers saw him and froze. Then they saw the Titan and their weapons came up immediately. David raised his hands, showing he was unarmed, and kept walking. This was the critical moment. How the Coalition reacted would determine everything. The lead officer, an insectoid with translator equipment built into its suit, spoke first. Its voice came through synthesized and cold. "Prisoner David Reeves, you should be deceased. Explain your presence," David smiled. After 2 months in the jungle, speaking Coalition common felt strange. "I survived. Built a settlement. Tamed the local apex predator. Made the impossible possible. That's my explanation." The officer's multifaceted eyes reflected light in patterns that might have been disbelief. "Titans cannot be tamed. Refuge 9 cannot support life. Your statement contradicts all established data. Then your data is wrong." David gestured back toward the settlement. "I have 8 survivors living there. Growing food. Building structures. We've been here 60 days and we're thriving. Send your scan drones. Check for yourselves." The officers conferred in a language the translator didn't handle. David waited patiently. Ash made that soft questioning sound and one officer actually jumped backward. David raised a hand and Ash settled down. The officers noticed that interaction. Their body language changed from confused to deeply unsettled. Finally, the lead officer spoke again. "We will document this anomaly. The Coalition Council will require a full report. Standard procedure suggests immediate extraction of all survivors." "No." David's voice was flat, absolute. "We're not leaving. This is our home now. You are prisoners. You have no authority to refuse extraction." David had prepared for this. He'd spent 2 weeks thinking through every angle, every argument. "I'm claiming Refuge 9 under Article 12 of the Coalition Charter. Any world successfully colonized by a member species for 60 days or more can petition for colonial recognition. I'm filing that petition right now on behalf of Earth and the human race." The officer made a sound like grinding metal. "Article 12 requires 30 colonists minimum. You have 8. Then I'm requesting the Coalition reclassify Refuge 9 from prison world to settlement opportunity. Send more prisoners. Give them the choice, execution or trial by survival here under human administration. We'll teach them what we learned. Build a real colony." The officers conferred again, longer this time. David could see them struggling with the implications. If he was right, if humans could survive here when no other species could, it changed everything. It proved humanity had unique capabilities. It gave Earth leverage in Coalition politics. It turned a death sentence into a territorial claim. The lead officer turned back. "Your proposal is unprecedented. The Council will never approve. They will if the alternative is admitting they left a human to die who then proved their entire xenobiological database wrong." David stepped closer. "Think about it. You've been using this planet as a prison for decades. Every settlement attempt failed. Every prisoner died, until a human got dropped here. That's going to raise questions. Another conference." David watched their body language and knew he'd hit a nerve. The Coalition prided itself on scientific accuracy. Having their data proven wrong by a single human survivor would be embarrassing at best, politically damaging at worst. The lead officer made a decision. "We will transport you to the nearest Coalition station for formal hearing. You will present your evidence to the Council directly." "I'll go," David agreed. "But my people stay here. And Ash comes with me." The Titan cannot board a coalition vessel, then get a bigger vessel. She's part of my evidence. The Council needs to see that Titans can be trained, that this planet can be managed. Ash proves everything I'm claiming. The officers looked at each other, at Ash, at the settlement visible in the distance. Finally, the lead officer nodded. We will request appropriate transport. It will arrive in 3 days. You will have that time to prepare your presentation. They left. The ship lifted off, leaving David standing in the clearing with Ash. He returned to the settlement to find everyone gathered at the gate, anxious and hopeful. He explained what happened, what came next. They would stay and continue building. He would go to the Council and fight for their recognition. Win or lose, they'd proven something important. The next 3 days were intense preparation. David documented everything: his survival techniques, the settlement's growth, Ash's training, the ecosystem management strategies. Reed helped build a visual record using scavenged equipment. Hannah prepared plant samples. Everyone contributed their stories, their proof that life on Refuge 9 was possible. The transport that arrived on day 63 was huge, designed for cargo rather than passengers. Perfect for transporting a Titan. David said goodbye to the settlement, promised to return, and boarded with Ash. The crew kept their distance from both of them, treating David like something between a prisoner and a foreign dignitary. The journey to Coalition Council space took 2 weeks. David spent it preparing his arguments, practicing his presentation, and working with Ash on behavior that wouldn't terrify the Council representatives. She learned quickly, responding to commands with increasing precision. By the time they arrived, she could sit, stay, heal, and even bow on command. The Council chamber was massive, filled with representatives from 200 species. David stood in the center with Ash beside him, facing judgment from the galaxy's ruling body. They asked questions for 6 hours. How did he survive? How did he tame the Titan? Why should the Coalition change decades of policy based on one human's experience? David answered everything honestly. He showed his documentation. He demonstrated Ash's training. He explained that humans weren't better than other species, just different. Humans adapted. Humans found patterns. Humans built communities in impossible circumstances. Those traits made them perfect for colonizing hostile worlds like Refuge 9. The debate lasted 3 days. Some council members wanted to reject his petition outright. Others saw opportunity. Earth's representative, speaking for David's homeworld, pushed hard for approval. The tension built until finally the vote came. The council approved his petition with conditions. Refuge 9 would be reclassified as a settlement world under human administration. Prisoners of all species would be given a choice: standard execution or survival trial on Refuge 9. Those who survived 60 days under human guidance would have their sentences commuted. Earth would gain colonial rights but remain responsible for all settlers. David accepted immediately. It was more than he'd hoped for. Refuge 9, the death world, the planet of monsters, was now officially New Haven, humanity's first colony beyond solar space. And it had been claimed by a convicted criminal who refused to die. The return journey brought him back to a settlement that had doubled in size. More survivors had arrived, drawn by rumors. Reed had become the settlement's builder. Hannah was teaching agriculture. 2 new arrivals were establishing defensive training. The community was becoming a real town. David stood on the wall that first night back, Ash resting below, and looked out at what they'd built. In 90 days, they'd gone from 0 to a functioning colony. In 90 days, they'd proved that humans could thrive where the galaxy said nothing could survive. And this was just the beginning. New prisoners arrived weekly now, given the choice David had demanded. Most chose New Haven over execution. Not all survived, but more did than anyone expected. David and his core settlers taught them the rules they'd learned. Watch the patterns, understand the ecosystem, work together. The lessons that had kept David alive now became the foundation of a new society. 3 months later, New Haven had 200 residents. 6 months later, 500. A year after David's arrival, over 1,000 people called the former Death World home. They built real buildings, established farms, domesticated dangerous species, and proved every day that humanity's greatest strength was turning impossible circumstances into opportunities. David Reeves, convicted criminal and condemned prisoner, became Governor Reeves, the founder of New Haven Colony. Ash became the settlement's symbol, the living proof that even monsters could become allies with the right approach. Together, they'd transformed a nightmare into hope, and across coalition space, other hostile worlds started being reconsidered. If humans could settle Refuge 9, what other death worlds might they turn into homes? Earth's political position shifted overnight. The species dumped on a prison planet to die had instead claimed it as their own. The title was proven true. Left to die among monsters, the human tamed the wild in 30 days. But the real story took much longer and was still being written. Every new settler who survived, every former prisoner who found purpose, every impossible challenge turned into just another solved problem. That was the human way, and New Haven was its finest proof.